How's it going, guys? Ashley here. Welcome back to another episode of the Uninformed Car Designer, where today we are looking at the 2022 Subaru BRZ. I had to look at my paper there because I have said Honda way too many times than I'd care to actually admit. But yeah, what a fantastic car! What a fantastic little surprise to have released during this time. I might sound strange, but I'm actually really relieved and happy to see a car of this type, of this ilk, being released in 2020 or 2022, whenever it will be released. It seems quite early to actually release this vehicle, which leads me to believe they're definitely putting out the feelers for things to change. So we might see small iterations and adjustments, but I could be completely wrong there. It just seems a little bit early. But by the by, it's really refreshing to see this car was what I was trying to get at. We're surrounded by an economy that is completely overrun and oversaturated with super hot hatches, expensive super hot hatches, supercars that have 2,000 horsepower, saloon and family vehicles that have, plus 500 brake horsepower, and SUVs at every 2 seconds. So it's really nice to see something a bit more light-hearted, something for the drivers, driver focused, not to take yourself too seriously, and a car that I think will fit in a real small but special niche. And I can see this car having a real good go of it for a few years to come. And it's good to see that they've learned and improved upon what they had in the last generation, which was a solid vehicle and a solid basis, but definitely need improving. So it's nice to see that they've made improvements seemingly all round. But it's not necessarily why you're here. What we're here for is the design talk and what I think of it and what I would have done differently, my pros, my cons, what I think you might think about it, and also breaking down probably a little bit here and there what's good and bad practice when it comes to design. But then again, these guys are the pros, and these they've designed this with for a reason. And every design choice has obviously been scrutinised, so I'm sure they had purpose and reason for doing what they've done. But having said that, we'll go through this as we watch the press release reel. I'm going to go through pros, which there are a lot of, and we'll go down into more depth later on in the video. But first of all, it's got personality. It has got spunk, it's got style, it's got charm, it's got charisma, at least on first impressions, which is really important for a vehicle when you're buying anything. Most of, if not all of the reason you buy anything is its aesthetics, the way it looks, the way it might complement your outfit, the way it complements you as a person, your personality, and its aesthetics and its seemingly approachability in my eyes is really endearing and quite nice to see. It's very friendly, very bubbly, but you can see it's got that little edge with the sharp details that say, there's a little bit of a side to me that you might want to get to know. And that's always quite nice. And also, by personality, I actually mean it looks like a Subaru. Now, I know Subaru doesn't have the most iconic DNA brand, apart from probably when you go way back to the Colin McRae rally cars of old, and you know distinctively what brand they are. But in recent years, they've kind of mauled over and deviated the which way and that, this way and that, when it comes to their design philosophy. But personally, when I saw this, I thought Subaru, for better or for worse, and we'll break that down. But there's a lot of cars now that are making absolute 180s and U-turns on design philosophies and styles that they've had for decades. So it's nice to see a car that actually looks like its brand. It's bold. It's definitely got smothered with strong and dynamic features, which is it's a great job. And they've done a great job, at beautifying what was, in their previous generation, a very bland and dull surfacing. However, we have to take into consideration that their partnership with Toyota back then did limit them substantially when it came to being able to tweak things and change things. It was primarily bumpers, fenders, and I think headlights, light clusters. So they were limited on what they could do in order to keep budget and costs down. However, clearly they've branched out. They've taken what they've learned and really improved upon it, and I don't think we'll be seeing a Toyota version. I expect it. I suspect it's highly unlikely with them now having the Toyota Supra. I don't think they need to touch this realm, though it would be really interesting and maybe something for a video in the future. Let me know if you'd actually like to see that. But all in all, they've done a really good job at bringing this to 2020 to 2022 for whatever reason. But yeah, having said that, overall the vehicle has a hell of a lot more stance due to its tweaks and features towards the rear end. Not perfect, but they do the job quite nicely. We'll get into it. And it's been dropped by an inch, so the general stance and stature on the road is hugely improved from the last version. Now, that's not to say everything I've just gone over is good or perfect, and there's a lot to go over, and I think that lot that can be improved, but we'll get into it just now. So here we are looking at the front end, and we're going to break this down and go through it bit by bit. Now, as I was saying earlier, this car is heavily expressive. It's got buckets of personality, and you can see that mainly in this front grille area here. It's just inviting, it's friendly, it's warm, and with a personality like that, you're going to want to drive it. All vehicles, if you look at them, have their own quirks and personalities, and they kind of sync with their drivers quite nicely. But these features around here show that there is an ever so slight dark side. The sharp angles mixed with the softer curvatures and the features just give it that edge and that split personality, which I think actually this car will have both on the on the road. It's clearly a really good performance sports car. Obviously nothing too serious, but it's all about using 100% of the vehicle's performance, and I think that you'll get that. One of the most important things for me here on a small car in particular is maximizing retail space. Now, with this being a very small car, the footprint isn't that large, and the retail space that you've got to work with in terms of detailing and features is extremely minimal. So they've done what I think is a really smart job at enhancing and utilizing that space by widening this main grille fascia area as much as humanly possible and stretching all of these details as far as they possibly can all the way around to the edge, and that just maximizes the space that you've got to play with and also gives the illusion of width, which is it's usually what you want. Obviously these features here really have a great stance towards the road, and that's mainly because of how far they've been pushed round. Now, I'll get into why I think, in my personal opinion, I probably would have gone a little less wider, a little narrower, but I do think that's personal preference. You'll have to let me know when you get when we get to it what you think and whether you agree with me. But I still think it's a very good choice on their behalf. Most importantly for me, and it's been the topic of most vehicles that I've reviewed so far on this channel, is cohesion and synchronicity of lines. Every vehicle so far recently has just been all over the place, and none of the lines seem to match or marry with one another. Whereas if I can draw all of these features, there's synchronicity and, as I said, cohesion between everything. There's not a single line that doesn't complement the other, and it's hugely important, again, on a car that is so small, to have these features at least hinted at if forms were softer, for example, because when forms and features don't match up and lines just disappear in random areas on such a small area, that area becomes heavily busy, heavily convoluted, and you waste the space that you've got. And because, again, these lines speak to one another, that space is just maximized and utilized to its best ability. So for me, that's a huge plus point in terms of this design. And finally, it's on the same point, I actually really love that these grille splines mirror this splitter area here. I just think that's a really nice touch for myself, and just something that really helps the design. Moving on to the headlight area now, another area that I think they made an absolute brilliant choice, and a huge improvement on the previous model. Now, obviously, as we said earlier, the last generation BRZ was in partnership with Toyota, so there was very little they could do in terms of design and changes to the overall aesthetic. But this choice for me here to push this design upwards onto the fender and above the arch is probably one of the best decisions they could have made. It again makes the most of the retail space. It doesn't focus all of the attention on this area here, which you might think, oh, you know, you want that, it's a great area. But again, like we said, there's a lot going on here at the moment for better. I think if you were to perch something right here, it would detract a lot of the attention. So softening up those features, minimalizing the actual light cluster design itself to something quite simplistic and clean, again, a really good idea. And it's got huge F-type, Jag F-type vibes, and that's not a bad thing, at least the last generation, which I think was the better of the Jaguars. But, you know, like I said, that can't be a bad thing. So, yeah. We move on to the bonnet area now. Another sublime design choice through by Subaru here. I was going to say Honda again. God knows why that keeps coming into my head. But they could have quite easily gone over the top and introduced a bonnet scoop, which, let's all be honest, I think we still would have loved to have seen. Even though it's not a boxer engine, it would have had no relevance whatsoever. But they could have easily done it. They didn't. I think it was a smart choice, and they kept everything quite simplistic in terms of its design. The light catchers around here are beautiful. They create a really nice halo and ring light effect above the arches, which is a practice in design that I think anyone who's learning to understand what makes good design, this is something that is a must, in my opinion. We all have the tendency to want to exaggerate and heighten the arches to give it stance and stature and more aggressive forms and features, but there are rules and regulations that we have to stick by. There's feasibilities, overall proportions, and consequences to everything you do. So you can't just go raising surfaces and details like so to emphasize even more aggressiveness. So you have to do that in smarter, more cost-effective ways. And the way they've done that here is using the highlights to their advantage. So these ringlets here have just strengthened that. And this, you can see this little light catcher area here. If that was more subtle, this area here on the actual fender itself wouldn't have as much impact as it does. But the contrast between these two surfaces is that dramatic that the illusion of weight is heightened and greatened. So when you're designing, you have to think of these practicalities and these reasons. Obviously, you've got crash regulations, pedestrian safety, viewing angles that you have to take into consideration, and it's these smart solutions and compromises that really make for a great design. So I think that area of this vehicle might be overlooked by a lot of people, but I really appreciate it here. And I think, to be honest, for the front end, that's it. I'm a huge fan of this front end. There are only slight tweaks that I'd change. I guess quickly talk about it. I mentioned once the front end being slightly too wide, in my opinion. I probably would have liked to have, or I would and will in my redesign, bring this in ever so slightly, just to probably match up with the inside of these headlights, and then just bring this feature in ever so slightly. Obviously, I'll probably change up the design of these areas altogether, but for me, that was the main area, is just align them with the headlights, and I think it probably would have been a little bit nicer and given you a little bit more retail space here to work with to maximise the form of the vehicle. And I don't think you'd lose too much of the width and retail space that I was on about earlier. So moving on to the side. First and foremost, this gives me huge Lexus RC300 vibes, which I think can only be a good thing. Subaru isn't known for its premiumness, its luxurious, its luxury, and maybe its quality. I'm not too sure. I think it's Japanese, but in terms of actual expensive quality is what I'm on about. So for me, this is a very welcome either coincidence or purposeful design choice, because from a distance and subconsciously, I don't think it's just me that's going to see the Lexus, especially not now if you've seen this, once I've pointed it out. But subconsciously, I think there's a lot of people that would look at this and go from a distance, oh, it's the Lexus RC, and then get closer and go, oh, actually, no, it's the BRZ. Oh, nice. And having that maybe illusion or trickery to it at the start on first impressions, I think that it'll have that little bit of extra weight to what it is, and probably entice a few more people to be actually intrigued by this vehicle. So whether it was a conscious design choice or a coincidence, regardless of what it is, I think it's actually going to turn out really nicely for them. Excuse me. But yeah, the side view, there's probably a lot more to talk about than there is the front in terms of pros and cons in contrast. And we'll work from front to back, starting with this front area. So I've already mentioned how I'd like to elongate this area here and probably just pull this down ever so slightly towards this way, maximising this surface area. So there's that. But for me, the main problem with this area, and I can't make my mind up whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, or I like it or I dislike it, but it's this feature that runs through above the arch. Now, the high point of this is roughly there, shall we say, and it falls way short of the centre of the axle and the hub of the wheel, which to me is a huge no-no. Again, personal preference, design styling, it's up to the individual to decide what they think of it. But for me, I like balance and proportion when it comes to arches. I like the high point to always be at the centre of the hub. It just distributes the weight more evenly across the vehicle. I guess you could kind of contrast it and say there's a nice strong point here, which is then broken up by this shoulder line. There's a lot of shoulder lines going on through there. And again, the shadow and the contrast is broken up nicely. I'm a fan of this surface purely because of the way it uses the light again to break up what would have been a very large area. All of this area through here is quite a strong volume. So again, they've done a nice job with using the shoulder lines and these features to break it up. But that is my gripe. And another one of those gripes is the slight dive that it takes. So if I can get my hand warmed up, it seems to dive through here, which doesn't lead anywhere. So I'm a little bit confused with that. And then you've got this feature that goes through there. I probably would have liked to have seen both features speak to one another, maybe join up way further down the line. But it would have strengthened this, I think, if it would gone more horizontally, spoken to this line again, spoken to this shoulder line. And yeah, so that's my 2 cents on that area. However, I love this. This area for me is one of my favourites. The shadow, the undulation that's caught here doesn't carry too much through to the door panel, which is nice. I don't want too much complexity going through here. I just hope this is real. I hate to see fake vents, and judging by the actual design of it, I think it may be. I think it was utilised definitely the airflow. Now, design-wise, again, if you're new, fake vents look great. They're always, I guess, sometimes welcome to break up and divide areas, but you can't just put vents for the sake of vents, vents anywhere for the sake of vents' sake, something like that. You need functionality to them. You can't just put a vent through here because, well, it's not a mid-engined or rear-engined vehicle. So that's something to take into consideration if you're thinking and designing first and foremost from the very beginning. But like I said, I hope that's real. Moving on to the side area now, the middle area, shall I say? Sorry, and this panel here, it's reminiscent of the actual past BRZ. It's hugely exaggerated compared to the last model, which I think is really welcome. Again, the dramaticness complements that of the front. My only problem is with this area is I don't, again, see where it seems to lead. None of the features seem to go anywhere or speak to anything, which is my only problem. They've done a nice job again with the lighting to kind of nullify that feature, and it ends that highlight quite nicely into this transition. My favourite thing about this is the shadow that this casts all through under here, and that just really adds weight to the bottom end, and just again exaggerates how close to the ground that this actually is. I think it's got a lower ride height of about an inch, and there's still a lot of gap between there. You drop that another inch and a half, this is going to be a sweet looking ride once you do that, and it's definitely something I would do. As we move on to the rear now, towards the rear, I'll start with the good points because this is where it gets a little bit annoying for me and a bit of a letdown. This ducktail I really like. It does a really nice job again of creating another shadow / highlight area, which adds a nice bit of weight to this rear end. I think if this was just a solid solid bench, not duck, sorry, bench, the proportions and the highlights wouldn't wouldn't flex as nicely, for sure. And I think it really aids in general this whole sweeping roofline. Definitely the way that highlight works with that transition there. The headlights slightly too big in my opinion. I probably would have liked to have seen them a little narrower. Then again, this at the time of this recording is only set to release in America as far as I'm aware, so you lucky buggers. I'm really sad to see this not in the UK or in Europe. I think it was fit perfectly with our kind of ethos and our use of vehicles. But nevertheless, like I was saying, I think I could be guessing here that this might be something to do with legislation and law in terms of how large those tail lights have to be. I know these are a thing in America that aren't in Europe, so I can only surmise that might be one of the reasons if it's staying purely in America. But we'll get to the rear end and talk about that again. So as we look at the rear now, we move on to the rear arch. It does a really fantastic job at emphasizing the weight on this rear end. Again, for those designers starting out, when it's a real importance to know what vehicle you're designing, whether it's front wheel drive, rear wheel drive, 4-wheel drive, a small city car. All of these factors will determine the actual proportions and shape of various features of this vehicle. Now, this, to my knowledge, is a rear-wheel drive vehicle. Therefore, the emphasis is all on the rear end. You want to signify visually that the power is coming from that rear end, hence the really large volumes and the exaggerated weight that comes from this area here. It really pushes out down here. Now, if that highlight was just that highlight that you can see there, and it followed nicely on from the headlight and round back to the C-pillar, I would be happy. This would be lovely. It will work quite nicely with this feature. You could probably tie in this area here, so it would probably speak a little bit better and go through there or through there. Great. But the problem is there's two highlights. So this line comes all the way through. Nice. Okay. Yep. Great. And then kinks there. And then we have a second. We've got another, which then dives off like this. And this is the problem. Just like over here, all the weight is completely thrown off. Again, now if it was this area, fine, but this high point is all the way over here, and you've got this mass volume which throws all the weight to this rear end, and it just throws. You can see how aggravated I am. It's so almost perfect. I'm almost glad that it's not coming to Europe now, so I don't have to look at it. But yeah, that really confuses me. I looked on the previous model. I thought, oh, maybe that had it, and it's just a design cue they wanted to carry on through the BRZ lineup. No, at least not to that severity. So yeah, it really confuses me as to why they've done that. You can see the really weird effect that it has on that highlight as well, which is a real hindrance. You get a nice kind of low light within the highlight where it really emphasises the shoulder and the weight of the arch, but it doesn't do it justice. If anything, it just emphasises all of this area over here. And finally, we move on to the rear. There's not much to say, to be honest, about this. However, in my opinion, it is a little bit of a juxtaposition compared to the rest of the vehicle. And what I mean by that is the whole front end was really aggressive and flamboyant. The side features tried to replicate that and did a good job with these features here. However, this is a really quite subdued, simple form. This whole feature through here is really quite relaxed and refined. You get a little bit complexity through here again, but the diffuser itself is really simple. You don't have much in the way going on, and I can appreciate that, to be honest, in a car that's been that is really quite stylized. It's just, again, like I said, a little bit of juxtaposition, so it can throw you off sometimes. It's more so for me this area and the highlights I was saying. So the tail lights. Those are the areas that really I would have liked to have seen a bit more detail in. Just form undulation would have done it nicely. From this angle, it's actually really nice. You can see the step that is created from this ducktail that goes through here that you can't see from any other angle. Again, adding so much weight to that rear arch area. For me, I probably would have tried to have just added a little bit more detail and undulation, sharper undulation to these headlights. See what can be done with them. Again, narrowing them might have helped, but then you would have had a lot of volume in this area, creating a larger shadow. That could have been combated then by creating potentially a vent, fake most likely. So I am glad that they didn't do that. They didn't fall into the trap that I think they potentially would have definitely looked into, where this feature would have kind of disappeared through here, and then you would have had that there. That, again, something that I think would have been definitely on their radar, but I'm glad they didn't do. However, I will be for the art of aesthetics, and we'll just say they had the budget to make them a real vent. That's what I'm going to be looking at for you to look at for in the next redesign video. But yeah, there's nothing bad to say about it, other than probably a little bit more complexity would have been nice. But I think overall, a really nice end to an otherwise solid vehicle. So yeah, so that's the Subaru BRZ. Overall, I love it. I'm really disappointed that it's only coming to America, seemingly at the time of this recording. But overall, I think it is a phenomenal achievement. Again, I'm so happy to see that we're still creating cars like this out there for drivers and enthusiasts, and I hope this is something that we can see more of from Subaru. They're a brand that I think have sat in the shadows quite a lot recently. They haven't really produced anything to the ilk of the Subarus, the Imprezas of old. They've been quite dull, family orientated, based for the older market. At least that seem to be the ones who are attracted to those vehicles, which there's nothing wrong with that. But for a company, sorry, with such racing pedigree and heritage to its name, I'd love to see more cars of this. And if we can take the styling cues from the BRZ, then we're all going to be in for a winner. So we can only look forward to the future when it comes to Subaru and what's in store for the rest of it. But until next time, I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you guys think, and if you enjoyed it, consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing if you haven't already. But until next time, guys, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.